It was a regular day in Ponyville. Fluttershy had been asked by Twilight to come to the castle. She wanted to show her, she wanted her help with a new spell that she had learned. When Fluttershy in her mind said, Twilight learns new spells all the time. Some things are just small things, some of them that she had learned from books that she had get from either Celestia or Luna. But this time it turned out to be a teleportation spell. And Twilight was asked by Fluttershy if the spell was even safe, because when she came there, it turned out she wanted to have Fluttershy to be the first subject to be tested on. But when Fluttershy was told, she even immediately asked if it was safe. She had told by Twilight that she had used the spell at least a number of times, both on several rocks, apples, and all items returned safely. But then Fluttershy asked how far to land. That is the question that she had no answer to. Because in the book itself, it doesn't even specify how far does the spell go. But she agreed to test it. And Twilight focused, and the next second, Fluttershy was there, but the next, she was gone. In the next moment, when Fluttershy wakes up, she is in a total darkness, and she had no idea what she is. But she sees some light in the end of this darkness. She immediately starts flying, but as then she stops. She doesn't even know how high this particular place is, so she decides to at least walk. And it took her maybe as the 20 minutes to walk out to the light. And for one strange reason, she was no longer in any close to Ponyville. But when she turned around, she saw it was in fact a train tunnel and train tracks. So at least she made near some train tracks, near some perhaps this same train that goes to Ponyville. But even though doesn't even know exactly how far away she ended up, she believes maybe that she had just ended up maybe at least a couple of miles away from Ponyville. So she decided to at least follow the tracks as far as she can and hope that she either finds another train station or perhaps any other ponies to be telling her where she ended up. But as she was walking around this, she decided to fly and maybe fly a little bit higher up in the air. But so far, no signs of any ponies or even a train station for at least a couple of miles that she could see at least. But the area itself was not familiar to her. Itself was different. It was like a lot of hills and some small forts in the different places. When she encountered some birds, she started talking to them, and these birds was surprised that a pony was able to talk to them or even understanding them. She asked them how far it is near the train station to if there's any other ponies that she can talk to. But the birds just said there aren't any ponies that they are aware of that have been flying or before magic or anything, or at least talking. Twilight Fluttershy was a bit surprised to hear that no ponies were able to fly or even talk. Maybe she had ended up in a place in maybe this far distant region of Equestria. The were ponies were maybe perhaps was not able to talk or even anything like that. But though they probably would have been stories about me mentioning this. But as far as she remembers, nothing like it. She thanked the birds for the help and she decided to fly further when she seen a train. But as she looked closer to the train, it doesn't even remind her of any of the train of friendship that, or express of friendship, was often goes to Ponyville and other places. But as she was closer to it, she saw it had a face, and it was actually singing. And the train was actually stopped in one place. It turned to be a small station. She decided to maybe try to talk to this train to at least give some sort of more information. She slowly walked up to them, to this particular train. And then when the train saw her, it first asked itself, has some ponies that escaped from their in the enclosure nearby? But when she said, no, I'm flying here, and then he looked at her and saw she was in fact talking, and she showed them, Fluttershy showed the train her wings, and he was not even believing what is going to talk, because in his mind, talking animals, and especially a flying pony, was nothing he's never ever heard about. But he said that he couldn't stay there for long because he had to go on his travels. So she asks him if it's possible if he maybe that she can have a lift. So even though despite this, but he agreed. So she sat down almost in front of the train itself and they start talking on his travel. And she told him that her name is Fluttershy and he told her his name was Henry. Henry tells that she's not that she isn't in some place called Equestria, but in fact in a country called England. Even though Fluttershy herself was not even aware about this, she asked him how many other trains like him can talk, and he said the whole train station where he usually stays or lives, everyone there can talk. So she asked him if they have been traveling around any kingdom, or at least this country, if they have ever come across anything like a talking pony or a flying one, or anyone who can perform magic. But he sadly said no, there aren't any stories like that from what I heard. But even despite this, they bonded this small but common. They actually started getting know each other better. And she asked him, "How far is it this where he lives?" It isn't that far, several miles away at least. And they actually decided as they were getting closer, he started asking Fluttershy if it was best for her maybe to wait outside of the train station and come back maybe at later evening so that she can be introduced to the others. Because he doesn't even know if the others of his friends would even believe him. So she agreed, and after a while, they actually said goodbye to each other maybe less than half a mile away from the train station where he stays. He decided to wait to at least when the sun is about half of the tree line about distant. Then she can come to the train station so that she can meet his friends. During that time, though, Fluttershy decided to keep herself hidden under some bushes and some trees that to make sure that no one sees her, just in case if anyone thinks that she is a escaped animal from a enclosure. Takes back to her farmer, which Henry did just mention though. When she saw that train, the sun was just about the tree line in the distance. She believes there was a time to go to see Tom Henry and his friends. Around the time only about a few hours earlier, when Henry returned, he met all his friends there. He told them about this strange creature, or this strange pony, that could talk and fly. Even the rest of his friends were just laughing off to say that he's joking. But he said he wasn't even joking at all, because in fact, he had even invited her to come over to see that so they can in fact prove that she is real. And even though most of his friends, but they were laughing, but Thomas, who's a good friend of his, said that he believes him. But there were even some doubts in his voice, maybe that he was maybe telling the truth, telling some sort of made up story. But as they saw the sun from the tree line was about, they heard a knock on the door, or at least it's one of the big gates, and it slowly opened, and they seeing a pony. At least it is that part of the story was true that it was in fact a pony. And when Henry saw it, they said, "Hello, Fluttershy. I hope you didn't wait too long. And she said no. And everyone just has been talking, end up being completely silent. It was some silence like they can hear a needle drop on the ground. Thomas, who asked, "Are you a flying pony?" And Fluttershy nodded and shot out her wings and actually flew by the air a little bit and landed again. All of his friends was surprising to see this. In fact, the whole thing that Henry told them was in fact the truth. They did actually say that they didn't even believe in the first place. They thought he made up some sort of story to make maybe as a bad joke or maybe some trying to be funny. But Henry, he didn't even take that as a bad way. And in fact, himself, when he's mentioned that when he first saw her, he couldn't even believe it. That was in fact even true. He thought maybe that he was dreaming of something. But despite this, Henry and the others was really surprised to see it was in fact a pony like Fluttershy. But they want to know more about her, where she's coming from, and if there are any trains where she lives. She explained that she's from a kingdom by the name Equestria, and there in fact are trains there, and they ask if they can talk, and like them. But they just said no, they can't even talk or even at all. They surprised them a bit that at least they know that there are trains in from where she's from. But then Thomas asked, "Do you know any way back to your supposed kingdom?" And Fluttershy looked and said, "No, I I have no idea." And then she explained how she may have ended up in England. A friend of hers by the name Twilight Sparkle used a magic spell, some sort of teleportation spell, but it somehow must have teleported her not only across to their home from she lives, but to this kingdom of England. Even Henry itself and the others have no idea exactly how magic works or teleportation spells, but Henry believes maybe that she had somehow must have crossed over from her world to theirs. And even though in her mind it seems the only most logical answer, because otherwise they wouldn't even understand. So the rest of the evening, or at least about for a couple hours, Fluttershy talked to Thomas and Henry and the others for at least about that. They wanted to know more about herself, and she told them about some of her past adventures. Even despite when it was about midnight, Fluttershy said that she was getting tired and she may have to go find some state a place to stay for the sleep. But Thomas and the others mentioned that they were in fact a small place in their little warehouse where they live, that where she could make as a home, or at least temporarily, as she hopes. So she managed to find some blankets, and it didn't take her long for her to fall asleep. But even that night, in the early morning by the next day, when Fluttershy wakes up, she hopes that the whole thing with Henry and his friends was just a dream, a strange dream, in fact, and that she was still in fact home in her cottage. But as she wakes up, she was still in this strange world, and especially this strange country by the name England. When she wakes up, looks out, all the others, her trains are gone, except for Thomas and Henry, who is still a small talk about before they had supposed their own travel. And Henry was supposed to go on a long trip this time, and that he couldn't take him with her. So, but Thomas promised that he can look after Fluttershy, because he was only going to be back for at least about 2 to 3 hours, and she can stay there, and he will be back. She agreed. But during the time when both Henry and Thomas was gone, Fluttershy wanted to know more about the supposed England. So she looked around an area and she managed to find some books and even some brochures or even some maps of places. Even though she couldn't even understand the language. But that was not a problem because when Thomas came back only a few hours later, he decided to help Fluttershy to read over about some of the books. It turned out that Thomas and the others can actually read, and he taught Fluttershy how to read some of the books, and after a while, she managed to get some basic understanding of the king, how England were like, how different we were, that there are dozens, that means dozens of other countries around this world. It meant that she wanted to go back to her own place, but there were, in fact, no way for her to even go back though. Asked about that, she asked Thomas if he had ever heard about anything like magic spells or anything, or anyway, so if he knew any way for her to go back home. But he said no, there wasn't any. But he said that she could stay there in this small place, in their warehouse or their place to live for at least to figure out a way to get she could go back. But the staying of her there end up to be several weeks, and at that point, she hasn't even found a way back home. And now she had to even came to realize will never return. She will miss her friends, her friend Angel, the bunny, but not almost her family, her parents, even her brother. Even when she realized that she was stuck in this world, Henry managed to cheer her up by asking if she wanted to maybe join him on a trip, or at least if I'm traveling around this tracks, don't know. And it was in fact the best thing that he could offer, and it was the right thing to do, because just after they started traveling around, she started smiling and he started singing and they both sang. And then he asked her by some strange but if back home was she married with some pony or if she had any some pony like she stayed with. But she said no. And in fact she was in fact single. And she asked him the same if he had any some special some pony or a special train that she left. But he said no, there wasn't any particular train that he liked. Their friendship from that day on only grew stronger. They learned more about each other, and while Fluttershy learned more and more about this strange new world. She learned this world was populated by two-legged creatures called humans. They were in fact the most dominant species on the planet, which she learned. And it was different designs with different language around the world. But she preferred their Navy language, English, which she preferred talking to. But there was a point after that she had been staying at this England for maybe up to 2 months. She had started liking Henry a bit more and more. And in fact, she was now aware that in his effect, was capable of him confess to express feelings, emotions like anger, love, sadness, even laughter. But there were some things about that she didn't believe that she would have fallen in love with a train of all. When she talked to Thomas when they both were alone, he actually was just surprised that Fluttershy had fallen in love with Henry. But especially that he's a train and she's a pony. And she asked if he believes that if Henry and her could work as a couple. Even though Thomas doesn't even have a good answer at first, because This was something that he never even thought that could even happen. But he said if she likes him that way, or perhaps even more, they should probably talk about it, or at least that she should tell him how she feels. Even though Fluttershy had this conversation with Thomas, she was still getting a little bit nervous or a little bit afraid how Henry would react. She had no idea if Henry would react in a good way or a bad way, because in a bad scenario, she had no idea if Henry would like say, "I'm sorry, Fluttershy, but I like you as a friend, and that's it. And I don't think it would even work between us since you're a pony and I'm a trade." That was something that she had getting a little bit upset about, or at least afraid. But she decided maybe that she should at least tell Henry how she felt, at least from that point. And of course, she did that when they were alone in their stay. He was silent, but then he started laughing, and then she started crying because of it. Because she believed that he was laughing at even the basic idea of them being together. But he said, "Fluttershy, are you for really that you're in love with me?" And she smiled, she nodded and said, "Yes, I am. But I understand you don't like me the same way back, though," she said a little bit sadly toned. He was about to leave, but he said, "Well, Fluttershy, I do care about you. And in fact, you would have made me so happy for the past 2 months, and in fact, I would be willing to give us a chance to see if it can work as a couple." And she turned around and said, "Really? Of course. After all, you're very kind, and I haven't even considered been dating anyone on a special train or, in this case, a pony. You're really unusual, and in a good way." And they decided to be a couple back then, though. But since they couldn't even go to different places from a date, but they managed to do their dating on traveling on the tracks, and it worked. And after nearly about a year of dating, they had all by the time at that point had told Thomas and the rest of their friends, and they were actually really happy, especially for Henry, that he had found someone to be with, like someone that can make him happy if he has a bad day from work or traveling so far. But considering from that, he was really happy to be that he had his friend's support. But after they had been dating for about 2 years, Thomas had asked Henry if he would maybe consider to get married with Fluttershy, even though despite them would have been a little different. But he said yes, that he actually had thought about it and even planned to do so. And in fact, only a couple of days later, he actually proposed to Fluttershy, and she said yes. This wedding, though, supposed would end up in the same place, but Thomas acted as to want to perform the ceremony, and they actually had this a great time there. But sadly, though, they could have been going on a far travel, so far away from the honeymoon. But they decided to, since Henry was going to the next city over next town over to get some goods to transport. So Fluttershy decided to go with him as their honeymoon, which worked out well. But even though all about maybe as they have been married for about 3 years, they wanted to have a family. But that was the problem. Since Fluttershy and Henry could even had children of their own though, and since there weren't any ponies in this world that can talk, but they were managed to figure out a way to do so. They in fact even decide maybe if they couldn't even have children together, and they decide maybe they shouldn't even couldn't even if they couldn't even have children together or even have a family, but they decide maybe they could just be them themselves. And so for that, Fluttershy thought maybe it was a good way. And this is how Fluttershy and Henry found a true love, the end.